Thanks, Rick.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, Coach. Just kind of wanting to do something impactful, and I think you have that voice in this community. People look up to you; they can relate to you, and just with everything going on, I just wanted to talk to you, just touch on some things, and hopefully make a difference for
Yeah,
as much as we can.
yeah, for sure.
So just kind of, just I'm a white guy, a white young man. Just what questions do you think I should be coming in here asking? Just initially.
Yeah, it's such a complex issue, right? It's not a simple issue, and anyone that wants to argue that it is, they're just in denial. Okay, it's a very sensitive issue. It has multiple layers. It has different levels, and the truth of the matter is, um, it has gotten to the point to where it's now, in my personal opinion, again, this is race is a personal opinion because not everyone has dealt with the same, whether it be education on the subject or life experiences on the subject. But in my opinion, it's just gotten to a bottom line stance. And the bottom line is when you need swift, big change, then you have to have the powers to be to do that. And, I think in terms of someone in your position, again, with the different layers, like personally, one on one, that's a lot different line of questioning than what you would do when we're trying to speak to the masses. That's how complex the situation is. And so in this type of setting, if we're speaking to the masses, then I think what you have to understand is that race is America's oldest rivalry. Like we can ignore that if we want to, but in all reality, even if you look in the Bible, there were types of people who didn't like other people, and that's essentially what racism is not liking someone, whether it be for their color or their race, their gender, whatever the case may be. Okay, now in my personal opinion, when you talk about race, you got to have an open mind. Okay, you can't look at it through one set of eyes because it's so different. It's so different, and I think one of the biggest mistakes that happens when discussing race is that most people have a lack of empathy for the people who have a feeling of sorrow. And you can't, I can't judge you on what makes you sad. Okay, when you look at a coach, for example, a guy like myself, I personally have never dealt with anxiety or depression. Well, if I look at a person that is dealing with that, I can't lack empathy because I've never dealt with that. I mean, it's real life for them. And so if I'm going to approach them with a lack of empathy, I'm not going to help them in any way, shape, form, or fashion. And I think the same can be said about a lot of different subjects, in particular race, because, like I said, we can't deny the impact of race on American history. And I'm not just saying this from something that I've heard. I mean, I've looked into race, being a politics and government major back in, obviously we've all heard of slavery and things of that nature. And but even when you work into civil rights and segregation, the capabilities to vote for an African American, that was a political strategy more so than a feeling sorry for. That's just the facts of the matter. And so I think what has really happened is over the course of time, things have just grown up. It's just really grown up. So to answer your first question, and what questions should you be asking in a grand scheme of things, it's what's the root of the problem? Like what's how can we how can we fix this the fastest way? This thing of what I call, in my own personal opinion, again, systematic racism. It deals with everything. And I think the part of the criminal justice system in which a lot of people are upset with is understandable, for the simple fact that death cuts us all really deep. It doesn't matter who you are. When death knocks at that door, there's no other feeling on earth that cuts you that deep. And so you see why the emotions are all over the place. And that's just because death cuts you deep. And but it's so much bigger than the criminal justice system. But that is what's out in front of people who really don't have an interest in the subject. And so that's what they see. And then if you don't really dive in deeper, that's what you base all of your emotions on. And again, someone who doesn't choose to do that, they have to be empathetic to a person that does, because maybe they only have the resources to see race through the criminal justice system. But obviously, I think there's a lot more to it. And that's why I use the terminology of systematic racism, because I'm not just talking about criminal justice. I'm talking about education. I'm talking about housing. I'm talking about employment. There's a system that, whether or not you would want to agree with this or not, in which our Constitution was formed when the African American was not a citizen. That's just the truth. Okay. And I think one of the biggest issues that on a more grassroots level that race causes in terms of one-on-one is people take this thing of race personal, meaning it could be a feel of guilt. Well, there's no one in the world today who should feel guilty of slavery. There's no person, no matter what your color is, that you are responsible for slavery. And so I think the decision becomes, are you going to be an individual who wants to take responsibility to make things better, to change things? And if you're not going to be a person that takes that responsibility, it's probably best to sit this one out. Because again, it's America's oldest rivalry. It's deep. It's really deep. And you can't tell an individual how to feel about something of this magnitude. It is by far and away the biggest subject in our country. And it has been for a long time. And that is never going to change. Okay. Because again, when you look at most Americans, you either feel empowered or powerless. And a lot of that comes by the representation of Congress, to be quite honest. And that's what I mean when I say rich, powerful non-blacks, is when you look at Congress. I'm not talking about on a grassroots level. For example, my relationship with a donor in town that has a good sum of money, that has a pretty good influence on things that happen locally and is not black, has absolutely zero to do with the grand scheme of systematic racism. It just doesn't. Whether myself and that donor gets along with each other or not, it really doesn't have a impact on the grand scheme of systematic racism. And so it's this race, it's the granddaddy of them all in terms of American issues. So the granddaddy of them all, you've got to bring out your best, and you got to bring out your most powerful. You've got to bring out your richest, your CEOs of Facebook, Pfizer, Walmart, whatever the case may be. Those people have to say, we want to use our level of influence on the decision makers, representatives of the House, senators. Those are the people that can make this type of change in the speed in which it needs to be made. Okay, if JQH Arena was burning down, you and I would be like a water hose to put the fire out. Okay, if race, in my opinion, is the biggest subject in our country, which I truly believe it is, then the magnitude of the fire right now deserves the biggest fire trucks that we have. And I, I have a lot of respect for you, and I hope you have for me. We're just not America's biggest fire trucks. Okay. We're just, water hoses. And you just can't attack it like that. And so, my first initial tweet was the fact that I personally think talk is cheap. And here's what I mean by that. There are different parts to that tweet. Number one, talk is cheap. And so you can't, in my opinion, as a coach, you can't come out with a statement. All those statements that were coming out, because to be honest, I struggled with a statement because, I just tell the truth. I don't come out with baloney. And so I disregarded the statement. And so I just said, talk is cheap, because as a coach, you can't, and again, death cuts us deep. And that's what happened. You'd have to be an animal to think what happened to George Floyd was okay. Okay, so now death cuts us deep, but it's also the opportunity where it's easy to show empathy. Okay, now here's what's hard, and here's why I say talk is cheap. If you're a college basketball coach or football coach at a level in which your student athletes generate millions of dollars for the institution, and you did not make a statement or have not made a statement that they deserve a bigger cut of that money, then that's also part of systematic racism, in my personal opinion. Because what you're saying is, it's okay that you and your family have nothing, but you and your talents and your ability to go out and perform will make me and my family millions. So if you're not willing to make a statement on that, then you can't wait till the volcano erupts in which someone loses their life. And so that's why I think talk is cheap. And then on the backside of that, the fact that mentally, and this is the mistake that I think the powers to be make, mentally, whether it is physically or whether it is 100% honestly, mentally, the mindset and the feeling of some people in our country is that they are still fighting battles from 1960s. And so I just think from a mental standpoint, we as a country, the powers to be, have not done a good job of getting the narrative changed. Whether we want to believe it or not, perception is reality. And so at the end of the day, it takes, whether you're going to make an example out of someone to prove that we are not still there mentally. Now, a guy like myself, I have some level of intellect. I have resources. I can have conversations with a lot of different people where I can have a personal understanding that we have come a long way since 1965. But everyone's not allowed to have that. Everyone has not been given that opportunity. And if you want to sit there with a single mind and say that everyone has access to that, then you're just in total denial. And so, my tweet is that we have not, from a leadership standpoint, changed the mindset of America, and especially the African-American community. And how you do that is you do not allow two citizens to wait on a young man to jog into them and shoot him and allow them to go back to their homes and only arrest them when the whole country can see it. You're not changing our mindset. And so as a leader, what you have to understand is that media plays a part. So you have to, part of your strategic plan is you have to be able to get the media to portray what you want perception to be, because perception is reality. And I try to put things as simple and basic as possible. It's like, if you look at our team last year, you would think we had a 500 team. Well, if you don't look at who we played, then you might think we're just another 500 team, in which we could have switched out 3 or 4 games and been a better team. Well, Well, if you don't have that resource, that knowledge, that intellect to have that conversation on the inside level, then you're only going to believe what it is that you see. And that's okay, because that's a majority of America. And that's why perception is reality. And that's no different than race. And so the perception right now, whether people who aren't directly affected by this or not like it, the perception is we have not made a mental progression since the 1960s. And, you know, another thing, and when I say the powers to be the rich and powerful, you know, we still have senators who will refuse to vote on an anti-lynching bill because of a few words. Well, the impact of putting that out could help the masses, and making that unanimous. We all know that you can't lynch someone today legally and get away with murder, but just the fact that you care about the mental state will allow for you to make certain decisions that you may not even agree with wholeheartedly. And you know, you look at a coach like myself. I've never dealt with a mental illness in terms of seeking help for it, but I'm not going to promote an atmosphere where I do not want my players to go see a team psychologist. It's just, you have to have some level of empathy, or else things don't change. And it becomes frustrating to the common person, because all they know is what they've been told. And so if you don't deal with different races, or have the privilege to deal with different races and colors and backgrounds every day like a coach would, then you probably wouldn't understand that. And so that's probably the longest answer I've ever had for a question. But again, it is very deep, and there's a lot of levels. But the main thing is, you have to approach racism, race in general, in a systematic way, because that's the root of the problem. The problem is not whether or not you and I, the son of a police chief and the son of a mother who was given up at birth because her dad was black and her mom was white and her mom's family didn't see fit. Our relationship, in the grand scheme of things, they don't make race better. They don't make race worse. It's the total mindset of our country that has yet to evolve, due to people in power not wanting to lose that power. And again, if you don't study it and understand the reasoning behind, for example, slavery started as a means of labor to not pay for. Okay, so think about this. People were purchased and obviously brought to America to do work in which they had to pay to stay there. So their work was their pay. It's essentially what you're getting is someone to do work for free. Same thing I'm saying with a college athlete, right? So essentially, I go out and I recruit you and I bring you here and you do work, and your way of keeping your scholarship is to work hard without me paying you. That's why a college coach, if he's not going to be on the side of paying players, he can't be on the side of helping systematic racism as well. So again, that all started as a capital decision, okay? And then when you think about things, the abolishment of slavery, okay? So now you're starting to think about, you're getting to the Jim Crow part of Black history or African-American history, and in which, you know, at the time, they were free from slavery, maybe from a physical standpoint and a purchasing standpoint, but the mind is what was captured. And so it was all a way in trying to pacify this baby of slavery, in my opinion. And so as you continue to modernize with time, you go from Jim Crow to segregation. And here is one of the most disappointing parts of where our country stands right now to me. My grandmother raised me, and I believe she was born in 1936, I believe. And You know, it's amazing to me that um, someone that close to me was involved in segregation. But now that we are not in the 1960s, that we should have just forgot about segregation. Like you can't expect people to forget about what their loved ones endured. And that's where the empathy has to come in, because that affects everyone differently. And it's not a situation as to where physically we're segregated, but from a mental standpoint, one could still be segregated. And just the bitterness and just the darkness that comes with something the magnitude of slavery and race and Jim Crow and segregation. You know, it's like this. If I was to beat you 15 straight days, I could not expect you on day 30 to forget that I spent 15 straight days just beating you. And I can't get frustrated with you that even on day 115 that you have not gotten over the 15 straight days. So it has to be some level of empathy, or it has to be a situation as to where you sit this one out. Because when you don't sit it out, all you do is continue to frustrate the ones who feel like they're oppressed. And again, that's all systematic. That's all the grand scheme of things. And so until that understanding is universal, we're going to have issues. And that's why I think talk is cheap. It's 2020. We're still saying the same things as 1965. You know, not to be a historian, but the other night I listened to a State of the Union from Lyndon B. Johnson, who I'm not going to sit here and say he was a huge fan of African Americans, but he was the president at the time, and the speech that he used in 1965 could be a speech that's used today. And so to me, talk is cheap. We have to get the lawmakers to change laws. We have to get the people that can make examples out of people, make examples out of them. And then that will give you an opportunity to change the mindset. It's not about the physical change. You got to change the mindset. You got to change perception. And then we can start to work on a more grassroots level.
Just I don't know what the kind of racism that you might have experienced through your life, and you have adorable kids, and you have a son that's about to be a senior in high school, and is going to be going to college here soon, and going out in the world on his own here soon. Just kind of thoughts there.
Sorry, I think I lost you here. Let me see. Okay. So let me begin that answer by saying this. It's like anything. I think you have to have your own definition of what something is to you. And I would say that the word racism and racist, I do think that they are thrown in a very light manner at times. And for example, I have been racially profiled since I've been the head coach here, but I've never been shown a direct emotion of racism directed right towards me. And so it's like if you get pulled over and you get a DUI, that doesn't make you an alcoholic. It just means that you did something that an alcoholic probably has a high chance of doing. And so being a racist is a very, I mean, you have to try to do that. I mean, you have to deliberately try to do that in terms of on a consistent basis, show those actions. Now racial profiling, you know, I definitely have some experiences of that here, and not just since I've been here, but my entire life. And so my first introduction to actual racism was finding out that my own mother was given up at birth because her father was Black. And the reason why is because her mom's parents did not want her to be a part of their family. That's racist. Okay. Now, in terms of being racially profiled, you know, yes, I've been pulled over I've been pulled over since I've been the coach here outside of city limits. In fact, I was pulled over one time in Creighton, Missouri, in which no reason was given except for it was about 8:30, 9 a.m. in the morning on a Sunday. I was headed to a Kansas City Chiefs game, and I drove right by an officer and made contact, and I was pulled over, and my name was ran, and nothing came of it. Um, but again, you know, I don't know that individual enough on a daily basis to say that he is a racist. But I will say that he racially profiled me that day. And if I get pulled over at 9 o'clock in the morning and not given a reason for, I could only assume that it was because I did not look like someone who should be driving in that area at that time. And so I think a big gap of the conversation sometimes leads for one to assume. And then when we have to assume, you have to go by your own personal instincts. And so, but we, my wife and I, we try to educate our family on the truth. Okay. Another reason why I hesitated in having a statement was literally just 2 weeks ago, my 7-year-old son, every night almost, my 7-year-old son and my 5-year-old daughter, they play superhero and they pick a different superhero. Well, about two weeks ago, I overheard them playing superhero, and my son said, tonight I'm going to be a police officer. So in his eyes, a police officer is a superhero. Well, I don't want to change that. I don't want to change that. But at the same time, I have to educate him on the country in which he lives, on how things were built, because we've yet to reform them. And when you reform something, you don't have to change all of it. But again, from a mental standpoint, you need to get the majority to believe that things are better. You look at the protest today, and it's all different types of people. It's 1965. You look at the protests, it's all black. Well, today it's a little bit of everybody, and it's everywhere. And so he still has to understand that it is great to have a personal opinion that a police officer is a superhero. But you also have to understand that there are some police officers that are not superheroes. Okay. And, our goal as parents, our dream as parents is for him to also say his teacher is a superhero, or his children's pastor is a superhero. Okay. But the truth of the matter is, you still have to educate him that there may be a teacher who is not a superhero. And so there are conversations that we have to have. Our oldest son just recently received his driver's license. And so there are conversations we have to have with him in regards to how to conduct himself whenever he is pulled over by a officer. And, you give the officer the same amount of respect that you give your parent. But what you have to realize is that that officer is not your parent, meaning he doesn't love you the way we love you, and that there is a possibility that he could be disrespectful to you. And that might cut you, right? That might cut you deep in your core and make you feel a certain way. But you still must respect authority in the sense that when you are there on the spot, that is not the time nor the place to get what you feel is due to you. And that is a hard lesson. And whether one wants to admit it or not, that is a lesson that is way more prevalent in the African-American community. And the reason being for that is there is a history there. That's what you can never forget, is that slavery, Jim Crow, segregation is a part of the history that, again, the way it feels to maybe his mom or his grandmother may not be the way that it feels to you and yours, or that officer and his. And so it's just a lot of levels to everything. But at the same time, you have to use wisdom timing is everything, and that's not the time to do that. But again, we're not narrow-minded in our household to just look at the criminal justice system. So it gives our children a little bit better grand scheme of things, but everyone's not Dana Ford and his family either. Because fortunately for me, I had a white head coach in high school who took me in and saved my life. Because if it was up to the African American males in my life, their feelings toward their history could not allow for them to invest in me the type of way my coach, who was white, doesn't have that history, decided to do. Now, he did that because I was good at basketball. So there was some type of investment for return. And quite frankly, that's the American way. That's what America was built for. America wasn't built to be a social, equal country. We just weren't built for that. There's no way you can be built for that. And the introduction to your country for African Americans is to be slaves. We were built for capital. And so some of us are fortunate enough to get to that side of America. But when you get there, or if you are already there, you can't be empathetic to the ones that don't have that outlook. And that's, again, responsibility as opposed to guilt. It's no one's fault that some of the oppressed are oppressed, okay? But there is responsibility, all right? That's how I view that.
We did pass the 30 minutes. You still have a little time for.
I got as much time as you want. I mean, we can't. They got us on lockdown. Division I, we're on lockdown. We can't do anything.
Yeah. You did have another tweet. You tweeted out some of the rioting stuff. The rioting and the violence. It's going on in Bloomington Normal, my hometown, your college town. Just kind of what's the thoughts when you see just some of that going on at the moment?
Well, that's very disappointing. I mean, and that is something that is inexcusable as well. I believe I tweeted something about the officers who were trying to stop the looting that ended up losing their lives, and no one has the right to try to make a wrong a right by doing more wrong. I mean, that is that again, two wrongs don't make a right. And I think a lot of the individuals that do that, they have passion, but it's in the wrong. It's being navigated down the wrong road. And not only that, but you have people that like to take advantage of other people's sacrifice. And so, it's very disturbing. It's very frustrating. And it is something that will continue to move things at a snail's pace, because what it does is it takes the attention off of the underlying issue of what's trying to get changed. And at the same time, it shows that the reason why maybe some of the powers to be don't want to change it as fast as they can is because, quite frankly, they're upset that people will still do those things. And those things have no place in our country, as well as taking an innocent man's life has no place in our country. And so those things are very disturbing, and it has absolutely zero, it makes zero sense, and it should not be tolerated at all. And those people, God bless their soul too, because they're as wrong as any other person that's wrong. And it's very disappointing, and there's no excuse for it. And quite frankly, I'm not a business owner, but I like to look at our program as a business. If someone came by here and looted our locker room, I would not be happy with that individual. And under any circumstances would I be happy. But at the same time, it's such madness right now that it's all just one big melting pot.
You grew up in Tams. You grew up in humble beginnings in a trailer home. People look at you now and they're like, "Oh, he's a basketball coach. He's making plenty of money." Just the way you grew up there. Just fight. You seem like you fought for everything you earned, and to be able to get to this point where you are right now.
Yeah, I've been privileged in the sense of I had a grandmother who understood her race, she understood her country, and she educated me on many different levels. And um, she was always honest with me. And one of the things that she would always say is, you have to decide what you want out of America. You do. You have to make that decision. And unless you are talented enough to change the rules, connected enough to change the rules, then in order to get what you need, or in order to get what you want from America, you have to be able to understand what it takes to get it, and be willing enough to do that. Now, I grew up, I say privileged because it has nothing to do with money. It has everything to do with intellect, insight, intelligence, and honestly, and honesty. Sorry. So I am in the minority of the minorities, if that makes any sense. Meaning, I had a tool that could attract a non-black, my high school coach, with resources to help me. And then what he taught me was education. Get your education. And fortunate enough for me, I could play basketball and get my education for free. That way I did not have to take out loans or things of that nature to suppress me even further, while trying to you know make it in America. Meaning, we pay to go to school to get a job to repay the school. I mean, it's, again, America is built on capital. And so any opportunity that America sees to make capital, they're going to do that. But fortunately for me, I've always been a listener before I was a talker. And so I've been able to listen to all different types of people and understand where a lot of people come from. And I think a lot of that has to do with being from a small town in which there wasn't a lot going on. My walk to school, I could have walked to school and never been approached by anybody, right? There's some kids that grow up in places where they can't walk to school. I mean, they're going to walk by a drug deal, a prostitution corner, and maybe a racial profiling situation. And so, I'm in the minority of the minorities, but at the same time, there are still some things that I deal with. But fortunately for me, I have the intelligence to deal with them in a way in which I believe progress can be made. And I've just been fortunate enough to be taught that at a young age. I was fortunate enough to marry someone that also believes that and has been taught that. But again, everyone doesn't have that opportunity. Okay. It's the same thing with my children. Everyone doesn't have the same opportunity that my children are going to have. But our hope and prayer as parents is that they're empathetic enough to one or two things: help someone that needs help, or just be quiet if you're not going to help them.
Are you scared for your kids growing up?
Me personally, I am not scared for my kids growing up in America. I am not scared for my kids. I do not live in fear. Okay. I am afraid for the system of young African American kids because the system has yet to reform. You can't have a huge portion of your criminal justice system that was made during the Jim Crow laws still in effect today. And when you think about statistics, see, when you raise kids, statistics, you can throw them out the window because it's all about filling. Okay, so for example, if 1 in 100 black kids get beat up by the police, okay, well, if that one is your one kid, then you feel a whole different type of way about that statistic. Well, if your one is of the 99, you're not going to feel the same way. And so what I'm saying there is you have to take a broader look at the entire situation. And for me personally, I'm not afraid for my own personal kids, because my kids have a situation in which they can be in certain environments on a consistent basis that may keep them from that, but that does not 100% expel them from an episode that can be life-changing. But my empathy goes out to the system, the kids that are fighting this battle every single day. And that is the issue. Anytime you have a study that's done by, whether it be Harvard or Virginia, in which there is any town in America where possibly the population of African Americans that make up the census is less than 10%, but the amount of people pulled over on a percentage is over 75%, then you have to try to do that. You know, you can't accidentally do that. And so when you start looking at things like that, and you start thinking about a kid that's growing up in the inner city of Detroit, okay, he's going to have a different battle than a kid that's growing up on a golf course in rural Missouri. And again, you know, that's who my heart goes out to. And that's why I feel like the powers to be have got to do something about the mindset of our entire system. For us to be able to give the narrative that a portion of our criminal justice system was built around Jim Crow, that right there, that keeps you oppressed in itself. We should not be able to say that. But the only people that can change that are the powerful, rich, and when I look at it, the non-African Americans. Because here's the deal. If African Americans could change it, we will have changed it 400 years ago. It's the same when we deal with domestic violence, my wife and I. It's not a woman problem, because 8 out of 10 cases, I believe, are men beating women. It's not an abuser's problem, because the abuser is the reason of the problem. The problem is the good men, the 7 out of 10 that don't abuse women, that stand and watch. So you can either have empathy to try to do something, or you should just sit that one out. And so I'm not guilty. I don't feel guilty when we get a battered woman into our shelter, into our home, but I feel responsible for hopefully not ever that happening to her ever again. And that's the same way on race, except for, let's be honest, race is the biggest, it's the oldest rivalry we got. So it's the biggest problem out there. And the way we've dealt with it is denial and deception. And unfortunately, I think America as a whole has just, quite frankly, gotten tired of it. And a guy like myself, I was tired of it at a young age, but now I think the masses have gotten tired of it.
You tweeted out hashtag Black Lives Matter. There's so many people out there that just want to turn it into hashtag All Lives Matter and just make that argument. That's not what that's not what it's about. The All Lives Matter is not what it's about. Just just a message and kind of an explanation to those who don't understand.
Well, I think first, as a Christian, I don't have any problems tweeting Black Lives Matter. And that's just me as a Christian. And again, from a mental standpoint in our country, from a systematic mental standpoint in which that's how I view race, because I don't view it on a one-on-one basis, because that doesn't tell the story, okay? A systematic mental view, I feel like the message that Black Lives Matter should be spread. Now, on a systematic view of all lives in America, I don't feel like that needs to be spread, because I don't think all lives in America have an issue. And so that would be different if we had the history of being imprisoned to other countries for 400 years. Well, then that would change my systematic view on all lives. And so, again, being a Christian, I have no problems tweeting out a certain group of individuals matter. The same way when I go speak at a Coaches vs. Cancer event and they ask me to have a few words, I don't get up and say, my grandmother had diabetes. Diabetes matters too. And so it's just a time and a place for everything. And, it's one of those situations to where I hope that people believe all lives matter. I really hope that they do. I don't hope that they don't think that. But at this time and place, I feel like there is absolutely nothing wrong of me being a Christian standing up and saying that Black Lives Matter. And if me saying that rubs anyone the wrong way, I have to introduce them to Jesus. I have to. I mean, they have to know who he is. I mean, they have to. Because if you know Jesus, then you have no problem saying Black Lives Matter.
I saw you on Twitter just responding to some people, just telling them, hey, I understand you have that viewpoint. Thank you for sharing. Just why'd you find that important?
Because race is too complex of a situation to be single-minded about. I mean, just because I think the lawmakers in Congress are the ones responsible, that may not be the same perception that someone has that has no interest in understanding what the lawmakers actually do. They may only understand it on a grassroots basis. And the grassroots part of it is important as well, but my perception of race is it's America's oldest rivalry. It's the biggest monster out there, and it's on fire. And I just feel like we need our best, the granddaddy of them all, we need our best to take a step forward. And everyone doesn't have that view because everyone doesn't have the same education on it, and everyone doesn't have the same experience on it. And you have to be able to respect that. You have to be able to respect that. Again, my son thinks police officers are superheroes, and that's okay. But there are kids in the middle of Chicago that the last thing on their mind when they see a police officer is a superhero. And we have to do a better job of changing that. We simply do. And again, everyone's entitled to their own opinion. And again, my views are systematic mindsets. Systematic mindsets. And if you are allowed to build your criminal justice system or your education system or your housing system around the time in which African Americans were not citizens, then that's the message that is being generated and the mindset that's being generated. And it's true. We're not making that up. And so then that individual has to deal with that on a mental standpoint, however he or she sees fit. But if you have the power to change the mindset, that's what you have to do, in my opinion, or we're going to keep protesting.
You coached at HBCU, just the lessons you learned, just being there, just around at a historically Black college.
It was an eye opener. It was my very first experience when I went there to be an assistant coach. I growing up in small Tams, Illinois, our police officer, we only had one cop. He sat at home until you called him. He owned the local barbecue shop. He made you sandwiches on Saturday. I mean, so my view of police officers growing up was a lot different than most. And so going to a predominantly white institution at Illinois State and seeing the amount of resources that we had, that was different than all of my views when I was at Tennessee State in the inner city of Nashville at a HBCU. And you could see the pain on faces. You can just feel the atmosphere was different. And what it opened my eyes to was the history part that I had neglected all the way up until then, because it wasn't a situation to where that history was staring me in the face every day. When you coach at a historically Black college and university, the history of slavery, Jim Crow, segregation, criminalization is staring you in the face every day. So you have to be able to uh, uh, intelligently deal with that. And again, it's not a guilt, it's no one's fault, okay? But I do think that people should feel way more responsible in fixing that. And you could see the lack of resources at that level. You could see the lack of just the lack of pure joy is what initially I thought was the difference. But again, it's one of those situations to where that's part of American history, and that has to be accepted, but make the future better. Make the future better. And again, but there are a lot of scars when you start talking about Blackness in a historical standpoint, and you have to be empathetic of that. And if you're not going to be empathetic of that, that's okay, but don't be gruesome towards that. It's amazing to me. The only thing on social media that I'm just astounded by is the reaction to someone who is showing empathy for someone that they feel, in their opinion, have been oppressed. For example, if you are upset at your friend who is upset that George Floyd's life ended in that manner, I need to introduce you to Jesus. I need to introduce you to Jesus, because now you're talking two people removed. Not only are you not upset about what happened, but now you're upset at the person who's actually showing empathy for that. And I see that sometimes, and I just can't believe that. I mean, it's eye-opening. I mean, it really is. But it would be equivalent to, I try to put everything in the sense of something that we all can relate to. But if one of my players is struggling shooting, and one of my assistant coaches goes to help him with this shot, me getting mad at the assistant coach because he's going to help him with it. I mean, it's like, wow, you're not even upset about what actually is happening. You're upset about the person that's trying to show some empathy. So it's just a lot, man. It's just a lot.
Have you looked through hashtag Black at Mo State?
I have looked through that. And those stories are disturbing. Me not being on the campus every day, I have been oblivious to those. And I apologize to anyone who's dealt with that. And if I can ever be of any assistance to anyone, they need to come and find me in the arena down here in the basement. But that is a very discouraging hashtag. And that has to be fixed. And that starts with the leaders on this campus, and I'm one of them. And me being oblivious to those stories in itself is unacceptable. And I'm a part of the reason why that hashtag has even been able to be created over the last 2 years. But I'm gonna do my part in helping that hashtag go away.
Just players, what have you been able to talk to them about in recent days, Zoom calls or whatnot?
We have not elected to do a whole team Zoom call on this matter. It's been some individual conversations. Again, everybody's view on this is different. We have some kids who are on vacation with families, and I don't want to intervene on that. We have some kids that I've reached out to individually, that have reached out to me individually, and we've communicated about it. But that's something else I think the powers to be and the common citizen has to understand. Generation Z, they're not dealing with this. They're just not. And all the guys I coach are Generation Z. And you know, one of our guys who's not an African American has been disturbed by this more than anyone. And I just think that does show that there has been some progress made, especially in certain homes, but not on a grand scheme of things, because the marches are still the same. But Generation Z, they're not going to sit back and watch people be abused. Like when my mom explained to me that she was giving up an adoption because her biological father was black. I mean, excuse me, she was given up for adoption because her biological father was black. I asked her why, and she said, that's just the way it is. Well, when I say that to my 16-year-old now, Generation Z, that doesn't get it. And that's where our country is turning, in which statistically, Generation Z, there are more of them than any other generation combined in America. So you can take all of our generations that are left, and we're still outnumbered by Generation Z. And so things are going to change. And quite frankly, you know, some of the guys that we're coaching right now are going to make that change.
Just who are some of the leaders, the voices that you just kind of look up to throughout this? Who are you educating yourself through and just listening to?
Well, I think in a level of leadership that I have, being a I guess I'm almost now a middle-aged African-American male, you know, I listen to guys that are older than I am and guys that are younger, as well as I try to watch as much history on this subject as I can, so I can have an understanding on viewpoint. And but there's no individual that I think by name the masses would know, but I do lean on individuals who have lived through certain parts of the African American history, and then I talk to people that may be a little bit further away from that time period, in which they would be younger than me. And I also talk to guys that are inner city, as well as guys that are rural, and just to try to get as much information as I can. In terms of big name leaders, I don't have those type of connections. I just talk off my own life experiences and then the studies. I mean, I actually look at these things and because I'm interested. You know, I'm interested in the fact that you know, there are some states where 87% of the time someone is pulled over, they're an African American. I'm interested in that. I'm interested in the fact that in some areas of our country, African Americans are pulled over 4 times as much as a non-African American, and of those times they're pulled over, less than 2% is there a citation. I mean, I study those type of studies, and so that's kind of how I get my viewpoint on these things. Because again, it's different for everyone.